Well, hi everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show. Here we are on a Friday night, the 6th of December, 2019. And it's been a very, very quiet week overall. Really, not too much has been going on ever since the storm from the beginning of the week kind of went away. And we've settled into a rather fast weather pattern that is weather systems coming through rather quickly here in the Northeast, or actually in the eastern part of the U.S. They really don't have enough time or energy to gather any momentum. It's as if the first storm kind of got everything out of the way in terms of what was available in the atmosphere. And that does happen. You get, big developments, and then the atmosphere has to kind of regroup, catch its breath a little bit. I guess that's a good way to describe it. And then it fires up again at some point. But for now, we've got things moving along for the weekend, and we don't have any big issues. We do have some changes for next week that we're going to talk about. We're also going to look at the long range, which is, as always, rather interesting. It's always a puzzle for us to have to take apart and see, where everything is going to be going in the longer term. But just a couple of things. First off, let me just remind everybody that Sunday is our Coffee with Chaffee show. And that usually we've been doing it at 10 o'clock, but I'm in Savannah, Georgia. I'm actually live right now in Savannah, Georgia. And Sunday is a travel day for me, so I'm going to just do the show a half an hour earlier. So we're going to start it at 9:30 rather than at 10 o'clock. So just mark your little calendars down or set the calendar in your phone. You'll get your notifications on Facebook, or for Patreon members, you'll get them on there too. So 9:30 on Sunday for our Sunday morning show, Coffee with Chaffee. One other thing I want to put up here for you, and I put it on the chat a little bit earlier. That's not it. I was going to put the link up again, but I'll get it a bit later here. Let's see if I can find it really fast. But for those of you who were really into the history, not just the history of Northeast snowstorms, but the mechanics of those snowstorms and how they develop, there is a wonderful 2-volume set of about Northeast snowstorms. It not only gets into the storms themselves, but it really goes into the meteorological mechanics behind it. What you have to see on a upper air map and on the surface map, and the things you look for, the blocking and everything else. Paul Cosin and Louis Uccellini are the two are the co-authors of this 2-volume set, and you can find it on Amazon. Let me just get the link again. Hang on one second here, and there we go. I'm going to put a short link up on the chat board. Makes either a wonderful Christmas present for a weather geek or for your own personal self, being all of you are weather geeks. So the link is up there on Amazon, and that is part of my Amazon link that I have, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. So let's get started tonight as we look at the weather across the country. I'm actually a little. It's not that I'm feeling subdued, by the way. I'm not. I may sound a little subdued, but I'm actually quite well rested. These storms take a lot out of me in terms of the production and everything else that goes on. And usually the period going into it is about a week long. So between the forecast and then the actual event, by the time they're done, I'm a little bit brain fried. And added to that, I had this pre-scheduled family trip down to the southern part of the U.S. So I'm feeling quite well rested. Thank you very much. So here's our U.S. Watches and warnings tonight, which really there's not a whole lot happening. We have a couple of very small winter weather advisories up in the northwestern corner of Massachusetts and southwestern Vermont. We have winter weather advisories across Montana and parts of Idaho, and in a couple of counties in Oregon. And we have winter storm warnings up in the Sierra Nevadas in California, with some flash flood watches up in parts of Northern California with some wind advisories as well. Otherwise, the weather in the eastern half of the U.S. is relatively quiet, and we don't really see too much happening for this weekend. One of the things that's going on right now, we'll take a look at the 21Z, the 4 p.m. surface plot. Low pressure is up in New York State. You've got this trailing frontal boundary. It's I don't know if you want to call it an Arctic front. It really isn't. It's more of it is a polar front. There's some colder air behind it, but it's nothing crazy cold, and that's going to be building into the northeast and northern mid-Atlantic states for Saturday. And when we look out west, we have a big front approaching the west coast and offshore, thanks to a fairly large storm that continues to sit well east of Northern California. It's wrapped up out there and just kind of locked away. And across the south, waiting for that front to come through as well. There's some southern energy here, and that's been producing a little bit of shower activity today in parts of the southeast United States. Nothing exceptional. Now, with regards to the weekend, and this goes to 7 a.m. Monday, snow amounts in the northeast. Now, this is from the system that's moving through now, and it's producing anywhere from as little as a coating to as much as 3 or 4 inches in some places. The general snowfall amount coming out of this particular system is on the order of about an inch or two. Now, we move back up across the plains and back through the northern Rockies, and we're seeing 1 to 4 inch amounts for the most part. You get up into western Montana and western Wyoming. We have a few areas that are going to see some heavier amounts. Also in parts of Colorado, but nothing crazy here. An inch or 2 or 3, a couple of isolated higher amounts there. And then, of course, the big winters where we have the winter storm warnings up in the Sierra Nevadas, where you have some double-digit numbers there and snow being measured in feet. I don't know what where that 73 is in California. I'm not exactly sure what spot that is up in the mountains, but you can see that's all pretty much mountainous terrain here. The Sierra Nevadas getting their snowfall out of this, and some scattered amounts as you peppered through parts of Nevada and Utah. You see it there. Nothing really exceptional. So there's a lack of major storms around. As we mentioned earlier, we're in kind of quiet mode. And here's tonight's satellite loop going past sunset. Clouds still around in the eastern part of the United States. If you look carefully through the Gulf states, you can actually see the little curl shape there. So there's a little upper air trough, a little shortwave trough that is moving through in the southern stream. And of course, you've got the northern stream energy that's moving a whole lot faster. So that keeps those two streams separate, and they just move on out. And then we get into the clearing behind it. And out in the west, if you look on the left, you can probably make out the system off the west coast there. And that's sending some energy streaming northward into the clouds, at least into Southern California, northeastward into the southwest, with some heavier cloud cover and eventually some rain that is coming in to the northwest. The radar showing that southern area coming into California, and also up in Northern California, you've got some rain, and into Washington State. Again, with the storm so far offshore, the rain is just beginning to get there. And then in the southeast, seeing some showers moving off the Carolinas. Looks like I missed them here in Savannah, and there are a few other showers to my west and north. We'll see if they wind up holding together. But that's that southern energy, which, if you notice on the radar, is completely separate. The northern energy in New England and it's just pretty much outrun it. So the two systems staying completely unfazed. So let's we'll take you through the surface map, and then I'm going to go back. We're going to take a look at the upper air and see what's going on. And of course, our first low to the north goes out. The southern energy is really not producing very much in the way of any kind of surface low pressure. It's just very weak. That's moving out to the east. And then the next high moves very quickly through upstate New York and off the New England coast. So that sets up the return flow on Sunday, and we start to get into the southwest wind here late Sunday afternoon into Sunday night. Now, this is going to bring up warmer air relatively quickly. It's also going to bring in some Atlantic moisture and Gulf moisture and take it northward. We've got another cold front here that is lining up, and you have that low that you see in northern Texas. That is all this energy that's coming into California. That is moving eastward, and that is going to be the next weather system that winds up going up to the north toward the Great Lakes. So going into Monday, you start to see that Atlantic moisture getting involved, and a large area of rain breaks out. I think probably the best thing for me to do here is switch to the radar, if it's going to let me. Why is my, oh, there it goes. Sorry about that. But let's switch to the radar view of the GFS. And you see it here. The rain comes in actually 2 waves of precip. So here's our precip for tonight, which is going to be gone shortly. So here's the first wave. Monday morning, you got some coastal rain there from North Carolina to southern New England. And then you have the second area that comes out of the Great Lakes. Not a lot of snow with this, by the way, and the reason for that is because the surface low, which runs out from Texas, really doesn't catch any deepening. This was something that the models were showing the system wrapping up into a 980-ish low going into the Great Lakes, which would have produced a pretty sizable snowstorm in places like Wisconsin, northern Illinois, maybe to Chicago, Iowa, and Minnesota. But the low is just staying very weak until it gets up into Canada. Once it gets over Lake Huron and that northern energy gets involved, you start to get the low to deepen a bit. And meanwhile, we're seeing these waves of rain showers moving through the northeast. And remember, there's still a very deep snow cover. So you're going to probably see substantial snow melt out of this. And the rain, not a whole lot of it, probably on the order of some places perhaps getting an inch to an inch and a half. But I think most areas are going to wind up with about a half an inch to an inch. But between that and the melting snow, there should probably be some flooding. Now, the front is going to come through during the day on Tuesday, and the GFS and the Canadian, the European not so much. One of the things that's happening here is that you're seeing another wave that's going to try to develop. And Robert Brown, you asked me today on the Patreon platform to kind of get into why does this happen, and what is the reason why you're going to see a wave out of this. Well, when you look at the upper air, and I pulled up here, this is the 500 millibar chart, the 18,000 foot chart, and I want you to look at and notice a couple of things. First off, you've got this trough, this northern shortwave trough that is swinging, that's going to be swinging through, and I'll highlight it here for you. So right in here, you've got this northern stream energy. There's also southern stream energy that's pretty evident. And that's going to be moving to the east. The other thing to notice is that the trough is pretty broad, okay? It's not one of these V-shaped troughs that's moving through. This is a very, very broad trough that is swinging eastward. And the northern energy goes up so far to the north that the front will only be able to get so far south. And if you notice back through here, this is Monday night, you still have this lagging energy behind. So when we move it along, that lagging energy starts to come eastward. It gets lost a bit, but there is still one more trough that has to swing around in the north. This is on Wednesday morning. It still has a broad look here Wednesday morning. It is a little bit sharper, and you're getting, these jet streaks that you see coming from southwest to northeast. That is a signature that you would look for one more wave. If this were a very sharp V-shaped trough like this, you would have, and it would be, and if that trough was moving along, you would have a cold front move on through, and you would wind up with a sharp ending to precip and skies clearing out rather quickly. But because of the broad nature of it, and because even on Wednesday morning we still have a southwest flow along the East Coast, I think you can make the case that there will be a second wave. And that's what the GFS really does with all of this. And why it produces, and you'll notice, at least in terms of the total precip, it does, and I'll just back it up, it actually starts a changeover to snow on the northern edge. You've got cold air coming down here. this 1034 high in Dakota. So you have cold air that's spreading out into New York State, into Ohio and Kentucky. The push of the cold air is going to follow the upper flow. So it's going to try to go south. Whoops, sorry about that. And it's going to try to go south and then go east. So that's going to really dictate whether there'll be a changeover to snow or not. And the other thing is to remember in cases like this, in cases where you do see a front going through where rain changes to snow, I would say 9 times out of 10, actually 9 times out of 10, either the changeover is so minimal that it doesn't really make any material difference, or it winds up in reality that the precip just shuts off completely and you don't see a flake or an ice pellet. In this particular instance, at least the GFS wants to produce this sort of narrow stripe of snow from northeast Alabama. I don't know how far south this is going to be, all the way up into southern New England. This is at 1 a.m. on Wednesday. I mean, I did mention it in my weather summaries that I wrote today, that this was possible. Every once in a while, maybe, as I say 9 times out of 10, there is that one time out of 10 where if you have a southern stream, if the southern stream energy is strong enough, you wind up with a developing wave that actually starts to deepen and intensify and increases the precip after the front goes by. But those are relatively rare events. I believe there was one winter that I could remember back. It was the winter of 2005, 2006, where virtually every system that produced snow in that winter was like that, where it was a rain changing to accumulating snow, and in some places it wound up being significant accumulating snows on the backside. But those are rare instances, and then it just kind of moves on through. You see how, if you look at how the precip, it's waiting for a wave to develop. It's a little hard to see, but there's a bit of a kink here in the isobar, right about here. There's some kind of low. So your frontal boundary is like this, and hang on, I just want to reduce this. I don't know what happened here. I took the transparency off. There we go. So here's your frontal boundary, and then there's your wave that develops. So the bottom line is you got this very broad. The trough of the north is pretty broad. It's not very sharp. There's some southern energy involved, and that's really what you look for as far as whether you're going to get a wave to develop or not. And you notice, by the way, I'm going to just go from this frame from 7 o'clock Tuesday night to 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. The precip kind of gets hung up very briefly. And at that point, the front is offshore. You see the model does print a 1016 low southeast of Charleston. There's actually probably another one that it's not printing. That one I had near Virginia is out probably somewhere well to the east of the Virginia coast at that point. And then finally, it's all over with as it moves on out to the east. And behind it, we get some very, very cold air. Now, that's what it looks like in terms of the precip intensity. Let's look at this from the standpoint of the radar. And that might be actually a little more useful in terms of, and unfortunately we only see the GFS in 6-hour increments here, but you can see that how on the northwestern edge of this, you get that darker blue. So if the model's right, and I'm not sure that it is yet, I want to see what it does over the weekend with this, but if the model's right, there'll be a narrow stripe of snow, and unless it gets really cold really fast, it's hard to imagine how this is going to be able to accumulate anyway. And then it just goes on out and it's gone. And you'll notice that the weather across the country here by the time we get to Wednesday is actually pretty quiet. Out in the west, the energy that leads to that is coming inland. There's a 1,004 low Saturday evening Eastern time. This would be at 4 p.m. Saturday afternoon on the California coast, sitting off the coast of Northern California. And of course, the rain and snow has been moving in during the day. Doesn't look especially heavy. And then the low jumps and reorganizes east of the Rockies, drops down through the southern plains, and then heads on up to the northeast, and there you have your system that goes by. The high behind it, the air with it is pretty cold, and that's going to be the story for Wednesday and Thursday of next week. And we've been seeing various runs of the models. That high goes out to Nova Scotia and keeps going. You'll notice that it moves rather quickly because we don't have any blocking right now. The blocking came and went, and I think what we saw the setup a week before last and going into last weekend, that was a very good example of how transient that North Atlantic oscillation can be. It can come and go so quickly. And oftentimes, I think of all those teleconnections that we show, that's the one that is the most volatile. Now, there's an argument to be made that after the high pulls out, that something's going to try to come out of the Gulf states and move northeastward. And the European has this, the GFS has it, and has had it for a number of runs. You'll notice that that low is pretty much a coast hugger as it moves up the coast. There's not going to be a lot of cold air left. Remember, this high, as strong as it is and as cold as the air will be as it comes in, is going to go out to Nova Scotia and then just keep on going. It's not even going to be able to hang on because of the lack of blocking. So the next low is going to be a coast hugger running into warming air, and that'll be mostly a rain producer as it moves up through upstate New York and New England. And the European has this, it has it further to the west, and the same, but it's the same idea where you're not going to have any real cold air to deal with later next week or into next weekend if this winds up materializing. After that, it does look like it is going to get colder once again. So I'm going to take a look. We're going to jump over to the upper air and examine all of this. And remember, up in the areas up near Greenland in the North Atlantic, the big difference from what we had at this time a week ago is all up through here. We had higher than normal pressures. Now it's all blue there. This is all lower than normal pressures. You got an upper low here. You've got an upper low sitting right there. There's a very, very weak upper, call it an upper high, sitting over Greenland, but we're looking at temperatures that are below, pressures that are below normal. And also in the zone of the North Atlantic that covers the NAO, which is this area up in here roughly. You want to see storminess in this area. One or two lows scattered around there, but lower than normal pressures in this part of the Atlantic. You don't. Instead, you have higher than normal pressures and basically a straight line, almost straight line west to east flow from southern New England out to just north of the Azores. So that really doesn't help matters from the standpoint of everything that's behind it. Interestingly enough, you do continue to have this kind of split flow out in the Pacific with this active southern jet. And here's your northern jet. We're looking at this is a week from now. There's your northern jet that's trying to break down cold air. But without a block, the issue is going to be the timing of the cold air and the timing of the southern stream short waves. The way you get snow when you don't have a block is you have the cold air coming in or establishing itself as you get some southern energy coming along, and it's got to line up in a certain way. And that is the timing of those features in both the southern part of the jet stream and the northern part of the jet stream will be critical, because a faster northern jet will mean maybe something comes down in the north, the high then gets to rush out, the cold air pulls out, and when the system arrives, it warms up and rains. So let me back it up. So even from the very beginning, going back to Tuesday, okay, when our storm was in the Gulf of Maine, of course, by then the blocking high was gone, and now you've got these various short waves that went through this week, the one that's coming through tonight, and now the next one is going to, is in terms of timing. So here's the next one in the northern stream and the southern stream. Look at the split in the west, okay? This is our jet for tonight. And you have a split flow in the west again, the jet like this. And then you've got your northern stream jet like that. That's bringing the cold shot for the weekend. But there's energy that's swinging around here. You've got energy that's coming in over there. And guess what? They're going to phase, and they're going to phase rather far. They're going to try to phase, and they're going to do it rather far to our west. So as a result, the flow turns more southwesterly, both at the surface of the loft in the east, and you wind up with that system for Monday and Tuesday, which is going to be rain. You see how the heights come up there. The winds along the East Coast go west southwest. You've got a nice Canadian connection of cold air, but it's all back in here for the time being until the trough swings around. Here's your northern and southern energy, and running forward, the north stays very broad, as we said. The south never really completely connects with it, and this sets up the possibility for that, back wave once the front goes by for later Tuesday or Tuesday night. That lifts out. Now you go to the end of next week, and now you're having, more southern energy that gets into Texas and the Gulf states. And now here comes the northern energy that wants to phase with it. That's the other critical question here for late next week and next weekend is the timing here correct? Is the GFS correct and the European correct in swinging around these troughs and kind of trying to phase them in? And that we'll have to see if that continues through next week. As far as the longer term is concerned, it's kind of interesting to me that we still are holding on to this sort of split flow. Now, the other thing I did notice, I'll see if this picks it up on this run. Not sure we go out far enough yet on the upper air, but let me check. Let me check really quick here. Looks like we are out all the way through. I did notice on a couple of runs in the last few days that we are, some semblance of higher than normal pressures start to appear in the polar regions. And now, of course, we are almost to Christmas here. It's December 22nd. But even on this run, we're seeing it again. Some high, toward the latter part of the longer range, we are starting to see, the appearance here of some higher than normal pressures again. And you still have, now this is much more of a blocky look going into Christmas. It'd be really cool if it winds up happening. Now, look at the Atlantic. Remember that I showed you before when there was no traffic. Now you've got that, and there was higher than normal pressures in that zone in the Atlantic that would create a negative North Atlantic oscillation. Well, you do have it on, this is what it would look like on this run, because you do have a low that's north of the Azores, but I think it's generally south of like 65 north, and that is that would be a good, solid component to keep the NAO negative. And you've got higher than normal pressures building across Greenland and in the polar regions. You still have this split flow here. The Canadian jet is coming into the northeast, but you still have this very active Pacific jet with weather systems coming in one after another after another. I have to tell you, that's actually, from a standpoint of winter weather, if you are a snow lover, you gotta like the Pacific this year a whole lot better. It certainly is a whole lot better than what we had last year with that long fire hose from Japan all the way across the United States and then continuing on into the Atlantic. You don't have that this year, and that makes it completely different. So if you can sort of hold that part of the pattern in place, then you can start to look at the other components and see if they can go into a mode that would be favorable for snow lovers. And I would say the fact that we've seen the NAO make a strong appearance just 10 days ago is probably a good argument to use in saying that we may see that flare up again from time to time this winter. We know how the NAO in the last number of years has been very elusive during the wintertime. And, and I also am a strong proponent of the fact that weather patterns do tend to rhyme. They don't repeat exactly, but they do tend to rhyme. So perhaps what we saw last week and going into last weekend is a signal that we could wind up seeing the block show up from time to time as we go through the winter months. It's always a mystery of these things, and I know the snow lovers at this point, because we are at December 6th, and we've only had one big snowstorm in the Northeast that really didn't. It did get Boston some decent snows, but it didn't bring New York or Philadelphia. A couple of inches to New York City. It brought nothing to Philadelphia, nothing to Washington, D.C. So I know that the chant of winter is over before it even has begun is out there. So that's a very natural thing for snow weenies to stand on the edge of the abyss, even at this early stage. But look, to me, from what I'm seeing, I'm a bit more bullish. I'm a bit more bullish going forward. I'm thinking that what we saw will make occasional appearances. It may not hang around every waking minute. We'll have an ebb and flow, but there will be opportunities, and I think there will probably be at least one snow opportunity of some kind before this month is done. And I'm not counting whatever might happen next later Tuesday or Tuesday night. I'm talking about something that looks potentially substantial for somebody before the month is done. So on the chat board tonight, it's nice to see everybody here on a Friday night when the weather is quiet. John Trabacchino, who did really well with the last storm, will probably a good idea, John, to monitor how much snow you have left by the time we get to late Tuesday. Mark Gladfelter got a little dusting. What was it, last night? You got a little bit of dusting, or night before last? I'm sure we will get plenty of snow. It's going to be that kind of winter. Lots of predictions for that. I don't know about plenty of snow, but as I said, I think what we just saw is something that may repeat itself from time to time. Timothy Veltman, the Indian Ocean is active too, 4 separate cyclones at one time. I know somebody posted somewhere about the Madden-Julian oscillation, which is, just what we need is to have, among all the other stuff that we look at. Oh, and speaking of which, I'm going to bring up the teleconnections. I forgot to do that. I do have them here. I set it up tonight to bring up the tellies. And the thing with the Madden-Julian oscillation is there's 8 different phases of it, just really quick. It has to do with the ebb and flow of the patterns in the wind patterns in the Indian Ocean and the tropics there. And there's phases 8, 1, and 2, I believe, are favorable for cold and some snow and snowy conditions in the eastern part of the U.S. And that we're in phase 2, but it's kind of stuck there in phase 2. It hasn't really migrated on to the warmer phases of 3, 4, and 5. Oh, and by the way, just a little off topic, but I was watching this biography of Gracie Allen, of a famed Burns and Allen fan. It is on YouTube. I recommend it. I haven't been able to finish it, but I do recommend it. Okay, so back to the teleconnections here. Take a look at that NAO, folks. The North Atlantic Oscillation. It's about as positive as you might get. It's well over plus 200 by the time we move through the December 10th to roughly the 15th time frame. So that would fall into my category of, certainly a very strong NAO, a positive NAO, which means it's very progressive. Weather systems, this is about as opposite a blocking pattern as you can get. The Pacific North America Index, ridge in the west, trough in the east, that actually is pretty strongly positive through the first part of next week, then kind of drops a little bit, then ebbs and flows, goes a little higher toward the 15th, 16th, and 17th, and then drops to neutral to slightly negative toward the latter part of the forecast period. Again, remember, these teleconnections are not predictive. They're snapshots of the model run from last night, the 0Z run of last night. So if you had them done every 6 hours, you would get a different set of numbers. These are done off the ensembles, so at least from the standpoint of the ensembles, it's a little bit of maybe a little bit of a smoother transition from run to run. But that was, again, 0Z. If you ran them right now at 12s for 12Z or 18Z, you probably would see some of these a bit different. And the East Pacific Oscillation, which is on the negative side, which is at least supporting the notion of the fact that we are going to have some colder air coming into the east. And then it goes flat to slightly positive into from about the 11th and 12th of December, right up until about the 18th, when it starts to trend back down toward the neutral zone. So maybe the EPO is kind of giving us a non-signal, nothing definitive one way or the other. The NAO is screaming totally non-blocking totally progressive. Everything moves from west to east. Cold highs come down, but they just keep on moving out. And your PNA index, which is going to be positive at least through mid-month, would be supportive of a ridge in the west trough in the east. So that would be at least give you a sense that we are dealing with some sort of storm systems along the way. I'm just coming back now to the chat board here tonight. Chuck Cardillo digging out from all that snow that you got from the storm from earlier this week, and I see everybody, Chad Crawford, all talking about snowstorms. Your 2009 Christmas Eve in northern Oklahoma, 1.5 feet of snow and 70-mile-an-hour winds. That is, blizzard for Christmas. I don't know that you want. I always thought the best thing to do was to have it snow, kind of a steady snow, put down a few inches for Christmas Eve into Christmas Day. Not a whole lot. This way, people that need to get around, get around. But it just at least gives a nice sort of scenic Charles Dickens white Christmas type of view, and not something that's so debilitating that it keeps people trapped in their homes. John Curtis, 2 of the cyclones are moving southwest. Does that mean they draw high pressure from the North Pole? Well, I'd have to look to see what's going on the surface. There's higher than normal pressures to the north of these cyclones, but they're not the highs that are polar, because if they were polar highs that far south, you probably you would see these storms. Obviously they would weaken if you could ever get polar air to go all the way down into the Indian Ocean like that, which they don't do, because that doesn't happen because of the Himalayan mountains kind of holds them all back and keeps them well up to the north. But there's sort of the kind of ridge that we see building across the Gulf states is probably what we have out there. I'm just going to see if we have. It's an interest. It's only recently that relatively recently that we at least can look at those regions, because it was so hard to find maps. Now, of course, with tropicaltidbits.com, he's got every region on Earth there. So I just want to bring up. I'm going to just bring up Asia here. And that's in the long range. So let's go to today. All right, it doesn't go far enough south. It goes down to about 20 degrees north. So these Indian Ocean cyclones must be further south than that. But I'm just looking at the flow. Hang on. I'm doing research here on the fly. Let me just take a look and see where these storms. Yeah, they're down at 10. 10 north, 8 north. There's one a weakening one at 15 north, 11. Well, this is down on the southern hemisphere. 11 south. Yeah, they're down close to 10 degrees north. So just go back to. I want to go back to your question. Hang on, I'm going to bring up the that upper air map again. Forecast models, regions. Can't really go that far south, but at least we could take it down to 20 north. So let me bring up the upper air, and then I'll put it up. All right, hang on. Here we go. So here's here's how it looks over Asia. So you actually do have, if you notice here on this, the southern part of this jet is down at about, it touches 20 degrees north, okay? You've got higher than normal pressures going on. There's a ridge here, you got a big ridge over here, but there's also a bit of an upper high that's sitting maybe over southern India. So go down to 10 degrees north. There's this narrow east-west ridge that runs from about southern areas of Saudi Arabia and then extends going eastward through central India and then down over to southernmost China. So those tropical systems are trapped underneath that high, okay? Not underneath any kind of polar high. Because if you look at the surface map, which I'll bring up right now, you actually have lower pressures all across the northern regions. North of 40 degrees north, you've got lower pressures up there. and you have some higher pressures as you head down further to the south. I mean, there's some lows in there in between, but there's no big Siberian polar high on this view. It's mostly lower pressures that are running across the northern parts of Asia, across Siberia and Russia. Late in the forecast period, you start to get higher pressures building over Siberia. You see it here when we're out at day 9 and day 10. You got that 1041 high up near the North Pole. That's just kind of dancing around there in the long-range forecast period. Also, I don't know if you can see it, but on this map, on the lower right, if you look on the lower right, there's actually some kind of tropical system there that's moving out to the northeast. I don't know where that comes. Yeah, that looks like it's probably. Let's just take a look. Now you got me all curious about this stuff. So let's go look at the North Pacific. And unfortunately, we don't have the rain map, the one with the precip. Just want to see where this. So look down. Sorry, the lower left. So on this map, it's on the lower left. There's some kind of low in the long, who knows if that's even real, but there's some kind of system that forms out around day 11 or 12, hits the Philippines, and then recurves northeastward, but it's way to the south. It's not like we're seeing some sort of recurving typhoon going up east of Japan, because that usually feeds into systems in the Gulf of Alaska that are more favorable for troughs in the eastern part of the United States. When you get a recurving typhoon, it likes to reinforce the pattern that is in place there. So hang on one second. Let me fix the board back up. And now I'm coming back to you. So I hope that helps you, John. Okay? I am more than willing to accommodate what you guys ask me when I can. Big difference between the North and South Pole. In ocean surrounded by land masses, the South Pole is a landmass surrounded by ocean. That's correct. And it's a very frozen landmass that's surrounded by ocean, even in the summertime, which is where they now have just begun their summer in Antarctica, or about to begin their summer. And Ryan Ford, we will do whatever we can to get snow on your birthday. Janet Forbes Dunn is on. Careful how you say pecan down there. It's pecan, not pecan. That's what you put on. That's what you put under the bed. To take to the Garden of Evil to take you to the Garden of Evil tour. I don't know if I'm going to have time to do that this time around, but I'm definitely going to come back here. Those if you've never been to Savannah, I was in the historical district today, and it's quite beautiful actually. And if you can come down when it's not blazing hot in the summertime, and you come down today, we got to 70 degrees here. With the sun breaking through the clouds from time to time. It was actually quite nice and quite comfortable getting around, no humidity in the air. You don't want to come here during the hot season. I can tell you right now, I can almost sense how brutal the summer can be here with 90 day after day after day, and the tropical humidity. All right, real quick, Timothy Veltman, and I know Scott Burler brought this up to me earlier today about the 2002-2003 storm. So look, I got a couple of minutes. Let's look at that, and then I got to go. So let me bring up the surface map. Hang on one second. Bring it forward. Okay. And let's go back to 2003. By the way, if you go to wpc.nsep.noaa.gov, you can do this. Go on their surface map, the Zoom version, and there's a calendar up in the corner, and you just pick your dates and go for it. And this is on the 5th of December, 2003. So, it can be done, okay? This is the thing about snowstorms this time of year. It can be done if you have the right setup, and that's really the key. You don't get them every year, and in this case, back in 2003, you had what was a pretty solid setup. Low pressure in southern Indiana, secondary low off the North Carolina coast, and high pressure up in eastern Canada. And I'll just move it along here, and you can see what happens. The primary and the secondary, the coastal low starts to deepen east of Chesapeake Bay. The high holds. You'll notice from going back from the overnight, starting from 0Z Friday, there's your 1032 high, okay? And going overnight into Friday dayside, the high is barely moved. It's maybe edged a little bit further to the east, but it's still pretty much anchored north of upstate New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire as the surface low starts to intensify here off the coast of Chesapeake Bay, off of the Delmarva Peninsula. You've got temperatures in the 20s and low 30s just about everywhere in the coastal communities. A couple of 3-star moderate snows showing up, temperatures up in the teens when you head up the Hudson Valley. This is at 4 p.m. on Friday, December the 5th. And now we'll go to, come on, load. Why is this? There you go. So now we're at 10 p.m. and your low is starting to wrap up. The primary is all gone. Actually, if you look at this setup, it's not a whole lot different than what we just went through, okay, with the primary low, although the primary low was much deeper. But in terms of what we had at the surface, what we have, the look on the surface, and the high up to the north, it wasn't really that much different. Some subtle differences. I think that the primary was too deep for too long, made a huge difference. In this case, the primary was much weaker as it moved into the Ohio Valley, and your low just kind of sat here all night long into the next day. This is Saturday, December the 6th. It's barely moved during that time frame. And now we've got a 998 low southeast of Long Island by the time we get to 1 p.m. on Saturday. And then that low starts to occlude out and redevelop and begins to move away, albeit slowly, because even as of 10 p.m. on Saturday, you've got a 92 low southeast of Cape Cod. And I'm still seeing some, 2-star light snows back to about New York City. And then finally you start to see that low pull up toward the Cape and begin to move away by the time we get to Sunday morning. So that certainly was quite the snowstorm back on that December of 2003. And that was a string of 4 winters, 2002 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and 5 and 6. The first time New York City Central Park recorded 40 inches of snow or more for each of those 4 winters consecutively. That had never happened before. So it can be done. You just sort of need the right circumstances. And by the way, also a reminder, at least from the standpoint of New York City, which many of you are in the New York City area, doesn't apply generally to the entire area, but last year's subnormal snowfall winter, which wasn't that subnormal, but was somewhat subnormal, was the first one in 7 winters, okay? And only the 3rd one in the last 19, which is a remarkable statistic, because if you look back on the statistics of snowfalls and annual snowfalls in New York City, going back to 1869, the vast majority of those winters produce below average snowfall. Okay, more than 50. Actually, it's probably more like the balance is probably either 60-40 or 65-35 as far as below to above. We've just been on this incredible, remarkable streak with storms in the north, with snows and winters in the Northeast that started back in the winter of 2000, 2001 and has continued for the 18 winters that have come after that. So the cycle, at least, is definitely in your favor. All right, I think we're going to call it a night. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it greatly, as always. Again, a reminder, the Coffee with Chaffee show is going to be at 9:30 on Sunday, 9:30 Eastern time, as opposed to 10 a.m. Eastern time, because after the show is over, I got to get out of my hotel room. I mentioned earlier tonight, if those of you who are really into snowstorms ought to take a look at this two-volume set of written by Paul Cosin and Louis Uccellini, who are well-known experts in the meteorological community when it comes to Northeast snowstorms. Not only do these books go back and look at storms basically from 1950 to 2003, but they go into the mechanics. So if you're into meteorology and trying to understand just exactly what you need to get these snowstorms, take a look at that link. These are great books. I have the first snowstorm book. I do not have the second, but I know a lot of folks who have had both, and I've been meaning to actually get the second one. So perhaps that might wind up being underneath my Christmas tree. And you can also find them, by the way, you can also find them on my Amazon link. And I put that link up also on the chat board too. If you shop on Amazon, it's a great, easy way to support my channel because Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin. And it helps keep my 2 free weather apps free and ads on those apps to an absolute minimum. So consider that if you'd like to. If you shop on Amazon, it is a great and easy way. All right, thanks very much for being here. I really appreciate it. As I said, we will see you. I might do a stream tomorrow night. I'll see how much is going on with me during the day tomorrow, and how much weather is going on. Maybe I'll pop on tomorrow night as well as doing our live stream for Sunday morning. So take care, stay safe, and we'll see you maybe tomorrow. Good night, everybody.